r/nosleep. Hosted by you/RisingMac. I'm a criminal psychologist and I interviewed a man a few years ago who shot his friends at a crowded marina because he thought they were monsters. He may have been telling the truth. As a criminal psychologist, I've heard it all. Virtually any outrageous reason you can think of for why someone committed the crime they did, I've heard. Now, when I say I believe someone who told a preposterous story, it's because I do believe that is the reason they did it. Due to whatever mental illness they might suffer from, there's times I believe them when they say a leprechaun told them to kill their neighbor. Obviously, I don't believe an actual leprechaun manifested itself to this person and that they actually only did what they did because they are crazy, but in my line of work you have to talk to the person as if what they were hallucinating about actually happened. This case was different though. I think I believe his story, and not because he thinks that's what happened, but because I've had a feeling for a long time he was not suffering from any mental affliction and might actually have been telling the truth. I'm going to post the transcript from my interview with him here on No Sleep. There will of course be some redacted information, names were changed, and I've cut out a lot of my trivial interjections in the interest of flow and pacing. Any interjection from me will be in parenthesis, and it will otherwise be told from his first-person perspective. I'll leave it up to you all to decide if he's crazy. A little about him before we start. He was a PhD-educated professor of biology, anatomy and pathology and serves as the chairman of the biology department at the local university. He had no personal or familial history of any kind of mental illness. Please introduce yourself and why you are here. My name is Michael Redacted and I shot my friends Dave Redacted and Gary Redacted right outside our personal science lab at the docks near Redacted Marina. Start from the beginning. It all started a few days ago when the school year concluded. We were taking our annual camping trip to celebrate the end of exams. It was me, Dave, Gary, and John, all fellow biology department professors. We go to Redacted Provincial Park in Redacted, Canada every year. We spend a few days at a campground and then we go to a deep woods wilderness campsite that we have to use our canoes to get to. That is our favorite part, the deep woods. There's never anybody there and we're all alone. The vacation went well at first. Once we found a nice site in the backwoods that started off great too. I'm scuba certified and we had never been to this part of Redacted Lake before. We were more backwoods than we'd ever been. I was eager to dive here. How's the visibility? Most lakes I've heard like this the visibility isn't great or there's nothing to see. True, there's not much to see. It's the same kind of fish you can see in a city park pond, but there's something about diving in a body of water few people ever touch. It's mostly unsullied by people's garbage and whatnot. Tell me what you saw down there. I didn't dive until our second day. It was very uneventful, but part of the enjoyment for me, like I said, was being 30 feet down and not seeing any trash or anything man-made at all. I went out further towards the center of the lake. Visibility was low so I didn't see it right away, it kind of crept up on me. At first I thought it was a small propeller plane or something, but I quickly realized it was too big. It was irregularly shaped for sure and had a large shaft toward what I figured was the rear of the craft protruding upwards that had a small fin at the top. The fin was probably about 15 feet or so below water level. I swam to what I thought was the front of the craft and saw a rounded area sitting atop the otherwise pointed bow. It had a little window that I thought must be the cockpit. The glass was broken and it was impossible to see anything inside. I quickly came to the conclusion based on the design of this vessel it did not appear to be any man-made craft of any kind that I had ever seen or heard of and that I was potentially looking at a UFO. I reserved full judgment on whether or not this was a UFO until I got a second opinion. John was also a diver and had brought a tank. I would have him go down with me to investigate further. I really shouldn't have been diving by myself anyway. John was immediately intrigued when I told him I had found an aircraft at the bottom of the lake and it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. He was ready to go in minutes. We took a canoe out to where I thought it was to save air and we went down. We found it relatively quickly. He did as thorough a swim around as I did. Seeing it again, it was kind of shaped like a large arrowhead. Look up an F-117 Nighthawk, that's kind of what it looked like, though it looked much more alien in design. It wasn't flat underneath. It had a bulkier cargo area or something below. John found a large opening in the hull underneath what appeared to be the left wing of the craft. He was ready to enter but I stopped him. My air was too low and it was getting dark. I motioned for him to meet me at the surface so we swam back up. I told him I needed to switch to my other tank. Each of us had brought 2 tanks, if there was any chance of us entering the craft. I also told him it would be much better to wait until morning. We spent that night telling Gary and Dave what we had seen. Gary immediately became paranoid. He was of the mind since we even knew this craft existed that we were in danger from the government. If we swam into the aircraft and actually found an ET, the pilot, we were as good as dead. We eventually decided we were indeed going in. We toyed with Gary, saying the pilot was probably long gone. He swam out the back, assimilated into human form and probably replaced, and is now living as the Queen of England. We eventually went to bed, but I hardly slept at all. I don't think John did either. The next morning John and I went down again. We approached the hull breach. It was more than large enough for us to fit in one at a time. It's important to note the exterior of the aircraft was metallic, but it was difficult to say what material. What I found interesting is that the outer hull was completely free of aquatic fungus or algae or even rust, anything that would indicate it had been there a while. This led me to believe this may have been a recent crash, and that made me nervous. We secured a rope near the outside of the craft so we could follow it to find our way out if we got turned around at all. Once we got inside, the interior told a different story. The inside was very dilapidated, nowhere near the almost pristine nature of the outer hull. Judging from the aquatic plant life and algae that we could see growing and the amount of fish that had settled and were darting out of every crevice we swam by, it appeared this vessel had been down here for some time. We appeared to be in some sort of cargo area. There was an open doorway near the back. We looked in and it appeared to be an engine room. We examined what we believed to be the engine, but rubble and pillars had fallen and it blocked our access to the greater part of the area. We proceeded down a narrow corridor towards the bow. We swam right and we came to a ladder. This ladder went up a few feet and we saw what appeared to be a hatch that was closed. We swam up to it and examined it. We pushed on it first to no avail and searched around the area until I saw what appeared to be a lever off to the side. I motioned to John and he motioned for me to pull it. I did so and we heard something near the hatch mechanically release, which also released a large amount of air bubbles into the water, but the hatch remained closed. We puzzled over it for a few seconds before John pulled out his diving knife. He attempted to slide it into one of the edges on the right side of the hatch and was able to penetrate a few inches. He worked it for a few minutes and the hatch inched open slightly before the blade snapped. It had opened just enough for us to get our fingers in, so we tried pushing and pulling. There was much resistance, but with our combined efforts the hatch slowly began to open. We swam up into what could only have been the cockpit. I saw the broken window I had seen from the outside. John swam ahead and around what appeared to be a large chair, probably for the pilot. I heard him let out a muffled cry of extreme surprise and he swam back towards me faster than I had ever seen him swim. His mouthpiece had fallen out of his mouth and he had to put it back in. His eyes were wild. He pointed to the chair and he made back and forth motions with his hands like he was turning a steering wheel. I was slightly confused, but then he pretended he was using a joystick and made muffled sounds with his mouth. I realized he was pretending to fly a plane and the sounds he was making were supposed to be the machine guns. I then realized he was trying to tell me the pilot was still sitting in his chair. I motioned for him to calm down. I was afraid as well, but I knew I needed to see this. I motioned to him that I was going to go and look for myself. I motioned for him to stay, but he shook his head. I then proceeded to swim slowly around the chair and he followed behind me. Any doubt that this was a UFO was then extinguished. The being sitting in the chair was humanoid, but definitely not human. Its head was about 20% larger than a human's, I'd say, and it was probably about 4 feet tall. Its arms were floating lifelessly in the water and were disproportionately long. I took note immediately about how there appeared to be no rot or skin breakdown on this being, despite the length of the time the cargo area indicated this craft had been underwater. I knew John and I needed to actually speak, so I motioned for us to retreat. We returned to the surface and discussed our options. After the initial holy shits and what the fucks, we discussed our next options. The first was to simply leave and not tell anybody, including Gary and Dave, what we had seen. We knew we'd never be able to keep that secret, so that was out. We discussed a few more options before I realized what we needed to do. Or I should say, what I badly wanted to do. I told John we needed to get it back to our lab we had at the docks and perform an autopsy. He looked at me like I was a complete idiot. He asked how the actual fuck we were supposed to get it back to the States. I told him my plan and he said it might just work. We then retrieved the body carefully and loaded it into the canoe. I rowed back to shore while John swam. I don't think he wanted to sit in the boat with the body. Unsurprisingly, Gary and Dave absolutely flipped their shit when we got back. I told them we were leaving right now, going back to the car and driving straight home. They were confused at first, but then John told them what was down there was not only a UFO but the pilot was in the canoe. Gary turned white as a ghost when he saw it and Dave was intrigued. I then laid out my plan. We drove an oversized cargo van. There was on bench seat in the back that sat about a foot off the floor so you could put crap underneath it. My plan was to leave the body in the canoe, pack it with ice and cover it up, then put the canoe in the back with us instead of on the roof. It would just fit since the front end would be able to fit underneath the bench seat in the back. We then drive straight to our lab. What kind of lab is this? You just have your own lab. We use it for ourselves. It's rented space in one of the warehouses. We mostly use it to set up lab assignments for students or test new assignments we think of to make sure they are actually a viable assignment. Okay. Please continue. Gary freaks out and almost loses it. He says if we get randomly searched when crossing the border back into the States, they'll find the body and we're all as good as black bagged. Dave tells him that as long as everyone shuts the fuck up and only the driver talks, we'll be fine. We all argued for about 20 minutes about it before it was settled. We were taking this body back to our lab. We got everything packed up and ended up leaving some things we could replace later since we were in such a hurry. It was a 3-hour drive, but only 1 hour to the border. We just had to get across. I would be the driver and would do all the talking. Gary was a nervous wreck as we watched cars seemingly at random get beckoned over to a separate drive area to be inspected. He held it together somehow. We crossed over without incident. Gary about had a mental breakdown as we pulled away from the station and were home free. We changed the ice several times, but otherwise the canoe cooler held up. I drove slightly below the speed limit since we certainly didn't need to get pulled over. We got to our lab at about 2:30 in the afternoon. We smuggled the cadaver into our lab and set it up on the table. We locked all the doors and made sure the windows were drawn as well. I realized at this time we were at a point of no return. We were about to perform an unauthorized autopsy on an alien life form. We had no idea how we were supposed to publish our results or what we were supposed to do when we concluded. We were all likely to get black bagged if this was something the government wanted to keep secret, but we had come this far and there was no way we were going to stop now. We video recorded the entire thing. My initial examination revealed the ET did not have a sternum similar to humans. It had 2 large sternum-like bones on the left and right sides of its chest, but its center was soft, making it an easy choice for a first incision. We cut deep in order to open it up. It was fascinating. It appeared to have all the same internal organs as we do, just in different spots of course. It was hard to tell what was what aside from the lungs. We concluded they must be the lungs because they were filled with water, initially indicating the cause of death was drowning. There did not appear to be any trauma anywhere else on the ET's body, so we also concluded it may not have actually crashed as initially thought. While we had it open, we labeled all the organs we thought we could. Whether or not it was actually correct we obviously had no idea, but for the sake of completion we assigned everything and came to the conclusion the ET had a heart, liver, lungs, kidneys and possibly a spleen. We then moved to its head. Its brain was similar to humans in that it looked similar and as far as we could tell consisted of several different lobes, though the main difference was that it appeared to be triangular in shape, as if it were a pyramid sitting within its skull. There was also a small, unknown gland situated near the base of the brain itself. We had initially deduced the brainstem was already accounted for, so what this other gland was we had no idea. It was at this point in the procedure that Dave stated the gland was beating. I asked how that could possibly be since this creature was clearly dead, but upon inspection myself I too noticed it did appear to be beating, very slowly. I placed my hand softly upon the gland and felt it pulse. I noticed immediately a silvery, metallic-looking bodily fluid of some kind on my glove that this gland appeared to be secreting. Not only did it appear to be still pumping this substance through the body somehow, it also secreted it into the cavernous spaces of the skull and down its spinal column. Using a syringe I pierced the gland and was able to aspirate a significant amount of the fluid. It was a silvery liquid that looked similar to mercury but lacked the shine. It was a very dull silver in color. I placed it into a vial for further research. Was it its blood? I don't know. I don't believe it was simply because the next day we found out what it did. What was that? We spent all day theorizing over our findings. We spent the night at the lab and didn't call our families. We weren't due back for a few days anyway. We woke up the next morning to a shocking finding on the cadaver. The incision I had made in its chest was in an advanced state of healing. We didn't equate this substance to this healing until after we discussed how an incision so large as to open the entire front of the torso could possibly look this healed in a little over 18 hours. We deduced the mystery gland with the mysterious substance was the only thing still functioning on this cadaver somehow despite its deceased status. We decided we needed to test this hypothesis. I could talk for days about our experiment, so I'm going to have to break it down to the most important parts. We decided to inject this substance into lab mice to see how they reacted. The first 3 mice we injected appeared to die, but they didn't actually perish. Clinically they appeared dead, meaning the fluid was incompatible to the point of causing death in the subject, but after declaring them dead they were found to be active again after a short time, though they seemed almost rabid. They viciously attacked the other mouse in the pen and killed it immediately and appeared to begin to cannibalize its corpse. I want to take this time to interrupt the transcript to say I have never heard anything this thought out, intricate, and scientific in my entire career. I am absolutely hooked at this time, and despite it being an appropriate time to break, I don't. We then attempted to terminate the rabid mice using an injectable toxin. We have euthanized many mice using this method, and this is the first time it did not have any effect on any of the 3 of them. I then doubled the dose and injected them again. They should have been dead in less than a minute, but they remained as active as before. Dave took over at this point. He took the tongs that we used to hold them in place and proceeded to pierce their skulls with the syringe. This method effectively resulted in their deaths. John then suggested we inject a few more mice but keep them all separate. I agreed and proceeded to inject 3 more mice with the fluid. It was at this time we decided to test our hypothesis that this substance was providing the cadaver a healing property despite it being dead by removing the gland. We extracted more of the silvery fluid since we feared removal of the gland would result in loss of the fluid production itself. After the gland was removed, a large incision was made to test our hypothesis. After nearly 8 hours, the incision had not healed at all, thus proving our hypothesis. Whatever this fluid was, it had a tremendous healing effect on this ET's body. That must have been why there was no trauma on the body from the crash, it had been healed. We also theorized that this substance could not actually bring the ET back to life should it perish, as it appeared to have drowned and died. I'm getting ahead of myself. Shortly after euthanizing the lab mice, we performed an autopsy on one of them. Though they had been dead only about 15 minutes, its internal organs told a different story. Atrophy and shrinkage of the internal organs indicated the mouse had been deceased for several hours. Knowing this could not possibly be, we examined its brain, where a large concentration of the silver fluid had accumulated. We had no explanation for this, and after lots of conjecture we hypothesized that with the amount of this fluid located in the brain of this mouse that it somehow retained its healing property, and despite the apparent toxicity of this substance it somehow kept the mouse's brain active, though on a very primitive level, while it caused the rest of the body to waste away as if it had expired. We felt this was an appropriate hypothesis given the toxin we used had no effect on the mouse, and only after we pierced its brain did it finally expire. We then did an autopsy on the other 2 mice which produced identical results. What happened with the other set of mice? This is kind of the beginning of the end. 2 of the mice proceeded exactly as the first 3 had. They appeared to die, only they did not, and became rabid, immediately attempting to attack our fingers when we pressed them up to the glass. The 3rd mouse, however, exhibited something else entirely. Long after the other 2 had gone rabid, this mouse appeared to be completely unaffected by the injection of this fluid. We knew we had to be very careful with this mouse and how we proceeded. As it was not exhibiting symptoms of toxicity from this fluid, we needed to ascertain whether or not this mouse's body had accepted the fluid and was now capable of regenerating from physical injury, or if it was simply carrying this fluid in its body. Carrying as in the medical sense with disease? Correct. This mouse could simply be immune to the toxicity or incompatibility and not be able to regenerate from injury. It just carries this fluid in its body. Unfortunately, John got ahead of himself. Seeing the mouse appeared to be perfectly fine, he picked it up. It bit him hard enough to pierce his glove on his left thumb. He dropped the mouse and it scampered away. Gary and Dave immediately tore the place apart looking for it, as did I, while John began scrubbing and decontamination. We were not able to find it. We had lost our only successful specimen. We advised John to go to the hospital immediately, but he declined. It was his fault we lost the mouse, and he was determined to continue searching for it. We should have insisted harder than we did that he go. We never found the mouse. We spent most of that day in conjecture and hypothesizing our findings. By the evening we were still going over notes and making journal entries. At about 6:30 p.m. John had an uncontrollable coughing fit. He looked pale and diaphoretic, and we knew it was because of the mouse biting him. His thumb also looked disgusting. We were all biologists. We should have known to stop what we were doing and take him in right away, but we just couldn't peel ourselves away from what we were doing. Gary volunteered to take him to the local ER while Dave and I stayed behind. I never saw John again. While we were alone, Dave mentioned we needed to test the fluid on something other than a mouse. It was at this point I realized we had all gone too far. We should have just left the crash site alone and certainly shouldn't have entered it. Dave was starting to become fanatical, bordering on unethical. He started to offer picking up a stray dog or cat, and when he mentioned a homeless person, it was at that point I knew we were all in serious trouble. I told him there is no way any of us could possibly partake in something so unethical. He reiterated the fact that somehow we needed a human test. Maybe it was just something with the mice. If a human host accepted this fluid, it could potentially be synthesized to create the most powerful healing agent known to man. Sickness and disease could be eradicated if it worked. I repeated to him, if it worked, we would be responsible for the death of a human being if it didn't. It would absolutely be murder. After a few minutes or so I realized we did have a human test. John. I told Dave, just look at John, he's showing the same symptoms of decline the mice did. He then told me that can't be considered a true test. The mouse couldn't possibly have passed on the mystery fluid through a small, simple bite. A full injection needed to occur. I began to realize with John's condition that this fluid appeared to be acting like a true disease. If it were to be able to be transferred via a bite and then cause a rabid insanity in anyone who was incompatible, we could be looking at a major outbreak. I felt like I needed to call the hospital to warn them. Did you? I didn't get the chance. Gary came back at that point and said John appeared to look even worse after only 20 minutes in the car. I informed him what I had talked to Dave about and he immediately concurred we needed to stop what we were doing. We went back to the lounge room we rented out several other small offices in addition to the area we use for our lab, and found Dave was missing. Fearing the worst, we immediately went back to the lab and found him with a tourniquet on his left arm. He was injecting the silver fluid into his arm. Gary asked him, what the hell did you do? And I had some choice questions myself. Knowing he had just signed his own death certificate, I knew we needed to involve the police at that point. I was not optimistic that his body was going to accept the fluid as the mouses had. We discussed our options at that point. I reiterated my theory on how this fluid acted almost like a virus. All but one of the mice had succumbed to the incompatibility and eventually went insane. It was my theory that one of two things occurred in the mouse that did not. Either for reasons unknown the mouse accepted the fluid and was now a super mouse, or the mouse was simply acting as a carrier, meaning its body was unaffected by the fluid and it was simply carrying it. Either case, it would still be capable of transmission via bite. Gary was a virologist and he mentioned one other thing. Some viruses cause mutations of the host genome. Nothing like you see in the movies where they turn into hulking monsters, but we had to consider two things. This wasn't actually a virus, it just appeared to act like one, and if this fluid did cause a mutation, there's no telling what that would mean. You shot him, so obviously he went bad, and I'm guessing you wouldn't have mentioned this mutation thing if that's not what happened. That's what happened. I guess we'll just skip to the main event. I could ramble on about theory and our scientific shenanigans all night. We didn't get much sleep that night on account of Dave. We drew some blood and did an analysis, and his blood was loaded with some sort of antigen, no doubt a product of the introduction of that fluid. It seemed like it was rewriting his genome somehow. By midnight he was noticeably taller, as if his growth plate had been reopened by this antigen. This did not happen in the mice, so this was intriguing. But he was also declining visibly. He was pale, his color was leaving him, and he was diaphoretic. His decline was much slower than the mice and John as well. We'd virtually forgotten about John by that point. We had old hospital restraints in our equipment room. Dave said we should tie him down. He said he was starting to lose it. He looked like hell, like death. And he was huge. He was Arnold Schwarzenegger and getting bigger. His left hand was starting to contort and deform into this horrid claw. It was far too late to take him to the hospital at that point, so I knew we were screwed. We tied him down, claw and everything, though I didn't think that was going to matter. It didn't. Gary and I fell asleep like idiots. I woke up and it was about 6:15 in the morning. I nudged Gary, telling him to wake the fuck up, and we checked on Dave. He was dead. I instantly got a tremendous feeling of dread. How long had he been dead? Was he actually dead? He could reanimate any second. Did he? Yes. Gary was examining the body and he was way too close. I told him to back up, but it was too late. Dave reached over faster than I'd seen anyone ever move and had Gary by the throat. He snapped the restraints we had him in as if he was tied down with toilet paper. He then bit a huge chunk out of Gary's shoulder and then broke his neck. Pretty sure that was just on accident, though, on account of his new strength. I ran for it as he threw Gary away. Dave stood up and had to be about 6 feet 5 inches. He was 5 feet 10 inches or so previously. I went to the lounge. We had a .45 hidden there. Just in case, there were nights we were there late. The docs can gather its shady characters at night. Anyway, I had the lights off and I was hiding behind the desk. I could hear Dave's heavy footsteps outside. His respirations were like a chainsaw. I knew he was looking for me. The door to the lounge opened and I heard heavy footsteps enter the room. I'm shaking uncontrollably as I hear him stop. I ask myself, have his senses heightened? Can he hear me or even smell me? I hear a few more steps and suddenly the desk lifts up into the air like it weighs nothing, and Dave's claw is holding it up with just the one arm. His clothing was torn and tattered and his skin looked like it was rotting off. I don't know if he was startled or what, but what I did next was straight out of a ridiculous kids movie. As he stood there holding the desk up, I simply crawled between his legs out behind him and ran for it. I heard the desk smash into the wall behind me like he had thrown it. I made for the door outside, but then I realized something. I have to stop Dave here and now. If he gets out, how many people is he going to kill and then infect? I went back towards our lab. I had 7 shots. I would get as close as I could and put all 7 in his head. Head trauma is what finally stopped the mice. I slowly entered the lab just in time to see Dave wind up and punch a hole through the wall, after which he stepped out into the sunlight and into the marina. I followed as fast as I could. The early birds were all out on the docks and the marina getting their boats ready, ripe for the picking. I hollered Dave as loud as I could as I ran up to him. He spun around with a growl that would make a lion jealous. This caught everyone's attention, of course, and they all turned to see me run up to him and put 2 in his face. He stumbled and swayed before falling back. I then put 3 more in his head and it pretty much exploded. The shrieks of bystanders filled the area as everyone scattered. Running on pure adrenaline and nearly insane myself, I ran back into the lab. Gary had been bit, he needed 1 in his head too. As I got back into the lab, I saw Gary start standing up again. He turned fast. I put 2 in his head as well. No sooner did I drop the gun in pure shock that I heard rushing footsteps behind me, followed by "Get on the ground now." And here we are. End of transcript. So let me tell you why I think I believe him. I asked him about the crime scene and if anyone saw Dave as a creature, and he had no idea. He had no idea what became of the lab and all their research either, nor did he know anything about John. He was very educated, but he also had street smarts. He told me at that point that any day now, once it came out what had happened, the government would be stepping in and he'd be black-bagged. He was right. A couple days later, I was approached at the station by men in suits, FBI for sure, and they told me my services were no longer required in this case and I was to turn over all materials related to it. I turned over the tape, but I had already saved it elsewhere, so I wasn't too pissed about it. I asked the arresting officer and detectives assigned, and they told me they too had been reassigned and that the case was being handled externally. I decided to do some investigating of my own. First thing I checked was their lab in one of the warehouses at the docks. This was at least a week after the event and I could still see men in hazmat suits entering and exiting the warehouse, which seemed to be completely closed off, not just the areas they rented. I needed binoculars since you could barely go anywhere down there without being stopped and redirected by men who were most certainly mercenaries. Next thing I checked was the hospital. I have a couple doctor friends. I asked the ER doc and he said he'd never seen anything like it. They shipped him up to the floor real quick. Luckily, the admitting doc on the floor was also a friend. He told me they put a gag order on him, so we met in person. No traceable, electronic conversations of any kind. He told me that John died shortly after he was admitted. He told me he had pronounced him himself. He was stone cold dead. He said as soon as they bagged him up, John then sat up and started thrashing and snarling and growling. They called security and then called the cops after a nurse aide got bit trying to open the bag. They were able to zip the bag back up without anyone else getting bit. A security guard supposedly lost it when he saw John's dead body going crazy and biting a fellow employee, so he hit him with a portable oxygen tank over the head, apparently enough trauma to kill John, again. A few days later, the aide turned in her resignation via email and was never heard from again. He also told me John's chart was later deleted entirely. He told me you can't just delete a patient's electronic medical record, whoever did it would have to be way high up. As for John's body, someone from the coroner's office came to get the body, but my friend didn't recognize them. He knew all the pickup guys. They also drove away in an unmarked van. City vehicles were all clearly marked. Lastly, I went to the campsite myself where they went. I used my GPS to find the lake they said they went to and took the back road to where they launched their boats. It was completely blocked off, and not only were there angry no trespassing signs up, but there was even one saying intruders might be shot. I'm hoping it's been long enough that it's blown over and nobody is bothering with me anymore so I can tell this story. As for Michael the First, never heard from him again either. I tried looking him up in the system and his file with the local department had been deleted as well. Police records are another thing you can't just delete entirely. All 4 of their Facebooks have been deactivated and Google searches only bring up people with similar names. It doesn't even bring up anything from the university. Michael was black-bagged for sure, as were the other 3 post-mortem. I don't know about you, but this has conspiracy written all over it, and the more I think about it, the more I actually think this all happened, exactly as Michael said. One other thing I can't help but think about was that mouse that got away. Is there a genetic super mouse somewhere down at the marina, or did those government whack jobs find it? If they didn't, we all better hope he lays low. It seems like major outbreaks throughout history always start with rodent carriers. Posted by /RisingMac. When I was a kid, the old lady down the street had a room full of old music boxes. If they played on their own when you walked into the room, they didn't like you. You're probably wondering what I mean when I say they didn't like you? I didn't really understand how it worked at first either, but then again I was only 7. She never told me where they came from or why they did what they did, but the old lady had always told us the music boxes were excellent judges of character. Here's the quick and easy lowdown on these boxes. If someone walked into the room and music started playing without any switches being turned on, for one reason or another, they didn't like you. Maybe you were just in general a bad person. Maybe you were a swindler, a cheater, a thief, or maybe even an animal abuser. Point is, if they played on their own, it wasn't a good thing for you. Of course, you may be wondering what happens if they start playing for someone. What if someone doesn't heed their warning and remains in the room? Well, I think most of you probably already know the answer to that. What exactly were these music boxes, you may ask? Honestly, as far as I could tell, they looked like any ordinary music device that you wind up or turn on. I called it a device since only a few were actually boxes. Almost all of them had a theme that had figurines or something or other to make music. One had a ballerina on her tiptoes that would move around like she was dancing. She played Once Upon a Dream from Sleeping Beauty. Another had a hobo that looked like he was winding up a gramophone that played When the Saints Go Marching In. There were 3 or 4 Christmas-themed boxes that played various Christmas songs, and there was the circus clown. He seemed to be the leader, as he was always the one who started playing first. He held balloons in his right hand and when turned on his head moved slowly from left to right like he was shaking it no. He had pursed lips and his music even had a sound to it like he was supposed to be whistling. The old lady showed everyone that came to her house her music room. She kept a padlock on it whenever family stayed with her, which I remember sadly thinking wasn't very much. Now that I'm older and know the secret, I'm sure she had family members the boxes didn't like. Maybe that's why they never visited. Anyway, like I said, she showed everybody, especially door-to-door salesmen. Once I was grown, she always told me the boxes knew a scammer when they saw one and probably saved her from getting ripped off, especially as she got older. I was one of the only people she ever told the secret to. I was a little kid and I loved to listen to them. She always told me they loved playing their music for good people like me. Looking back on it, I didn't truly appreciate how amazingly crisp and beautiful their music sounded for as old as most of them looked. I kept coming over even into my teenage years to play them while I studied or something. It's probably why she trusted me with her secret. She never told me exactly what happened when they didn't like someone and that person didn't leave, but whatever they did, that person ceased to exist. No body or anything left behind. She told me only a handful of times the boxes actually took someone. Most were accidents before she put a padlock on the door, but the one time she actually fed someone to the music boxes was a home invasion. A guy broke in and punched her out and roughed her up. She told him the money was in the music room, so he dragged her in there and that was that. She said in a case like that where you couldn't get out of the room yourself, you had to close your eyes and not watch. The music boxes didn't want you to see them like that. If you didn't close your eyes, they might take you as well. I'm putting this memoir down for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the old lady passed away. I received a notice from her estate attorney that she had willed the whistle clown to me. I asked about the other boxes as well and was simply told those were accounted for in the will and they were going elsewhere. The second reason I'm telling the story of these music boxes is because I'm sure some of you are wondering if I ever used them to get rid of somebody. I sure did. Up until finding No Sleep, there hadn't been an adequate place to post this more or less confession since nobody would believe it. But the short of it is yes, I've used the boxes, just once, and I always thought that's why the old lady felt so close to me and maybe why she had left me the music box leader. It was the summer I turned 15. My dad had died when I was a baby and my mom eventually remarried a guy that turned out to be a complete loser. He was an abuser through and through and had his claws sunk deep into my mom. She was as typical an abused wife as it got. He won't do it again. It was my fault. He had a hard day at work. Same old horseshit. When I was 10, I promised myself when I was older and stronger, if he was still around, he was a dead man. I could have ambushed him with a baseball bat or something even as a kid, but I wanted to use my hands. I wanted to hit him over and over with a closed fist, just like he would. That plan went out the window when my mom was hospitalized and put on a vent. He got arrested, of course, but he posted bail and was out. This would end in the same way it always did. My mom would drop charges and move back in. The time was now. I just hoped the old lady wouldn't hate me. More importantly, I was afraid the boxes wouldn't like me anymore afterwards either. I waited a week since the old lady was going to be out of town. She had given me a key to her house a while back to water her plants whenever she was going to be out a couple days. I would lure dipshit to her house and see what happened. I had horrifying thoughts about what if they didn't start playing on their own for some reason. I had to remind myself that they would. If they played for someone trying to sell the old lady lightning rods for her roof, they'd certainly play for a wife beater. I took all the cash out of his wallet and cut his credit cards up with scissors. Once I heard him yelling and hollering. I lured him outside by throwing a huge rock at his windshield. He shouted out the usual horse shit about how I was gonna get it. I was unimpressed. I ran down the street to the old lady's house. I had already unlocked the door so I wouldn't get stuck fumbling about. "Hope you don't think the neighbor lady gonna save you," I heard him shout outside. I hid in the music room behind a dresser I pulled out. I heard him rush in, and to my delight Whistle Clown started up right away. Cinderella Ballet Girl started up next, and within seconds everyone was playing their songs. I couldn't actually see any of the boxes from where I was, but I took the old lady's advice and kept my eyes shut. "I know you're in here, you little shit." I heard him take a few steps before he stopped. The music boxes sounded like they were getting progressively louder, but it might have just been my imagination. "Wah, what the hell?" I heard him say. The music played on. "Oh, fuck." I heard him begin retreating, but the door slammed itself shut. I was completely out of my mind with fright and adrenaline, so it might not be what actually happened, but I swear the music they were playing started sounding ugly. Like they were playing sour or incorrect notes, almost sinister even. "What the fuck, open the door." I heard him pounding on it. "Open the fucking." I couldn't hear anything but the music, but something must have manifested itself. "No, no." I heard him scream. "I didn't mean it. I take it back. I'll never touch anybody ag." He was cut off. I heard him squeal in pain, but heard nothing that sounded like a strike or attack, only the music that played on. "I won't do it again," he pushed out weakly. There was one more scream and a disgusting sound of gurgling like his jugular had been slashed, and then everything went quiet. I was afraid to move, but I didn't want to stick around in case they started playing for me on their own, since I was now essentially a murderer. I finally came to my senses and stood up. I rushed towards the door but stopped suddenly. The room was as clean as it had been before. There wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. More importantly, there was no body on the floor either. From what it sounded like, the room should have had a nice new coat of red paint, but I remembered what the old lady had said about what happened to people. No bodies were ever left. The cops bought my "I don't know where he went" story. I told them what I did about stealing his money and breaking his windshield, but all I said after that was I ran for it and lost him and don't know where he went after that, nor did I care. Luckily nobody had seen us go into the old lady's house, otherwise there probably would have been more questions. With literally no evidence at all, they had no choice but to file it as a missing person and go on about their day. The old lady knew though, right away. I cried as soon as I saw her after that and said I was sorry. She said she wasn't even mad. She said she understood. She told me she was a battered wife herself at one point. Her husband eventually left on his own and she didn't feed him to the room. Most importantly, she told me she'd never tell anyone. There was one thing that was on my mind for days that almost kept me up at night. The boxes had known somehow what my step-asshole's deal was. I remembered him saying he'd never touch anyone again and pleading that he was sorry. Who was he talking to? What did he see and how did they know? Still makes me shudder sometimes when I think about. I didn't go back into the music room for months. I was too afraid. I just couldn't help but think they would play for me on their own. The old lady said if they did, they did. I had done what I had to do. Eventually, despite the groan-inducing pun, I decided to face the music. If they played on their own, they did. I'd just leave like they wanted me to. I entered the room with the old lady watching and waited a second. Nothing played any music. After a few more seconds of nothing happening, I walked over to Whistle Clown. I flipped it on and he started whistling his gorgeous song. They still liked me. Almost 15 years went by before I set foot in the music room again. My mom moved to another town, and after I went to college I didn't have much reason to come back to my old hometown. I decided to make a special drive about 5 years ago when I found myself about 30 miles away. I knocked on her door and she remembered who I was despite having grown so much. I told her I had missed her and that since I was in the area I hoped I wasn't intruding stopping by. This was all true, of course, but I was mostly curious about how the music boxes would react to me now. I'd been through college where I had cheated on tests and did many other questionable things college students do. I had not been a model citizen for most of my 20s at least. I was afraid they'd start playing on their own as soon as I entered. The old lady said she had a hunch everything was going to be fine. We had some tea before I went into the room. She didn't follow me when I left the table. I was pretty nervous, so I stood outside the room for what felt like an hour. Eventually I went in and held my breath. Everything was silent. I turned them all on again and listened for what I considered to be the last time probably ever. It was as wonderful as it had been when I was a kid. I'm not sure why she chose me to receive the Whistle Clown or who else is receiving a music box or why she's splitting them up, but it's not my place to ask. I don't think I would want them all anyway. I wasn't even sure I wanted the one. Nonetheless, I was relieved that Whistle Clown didn't play for me when I took possession of him until I flipped the switch. I keep it in my home office on a shelf. I tell my family my door is locked because I'm a medical professional and there's sensitive patient data in there. I have a heavy-duty lock on it to be safe, though I realize the potential danger of keeping it around. I thought about getting rid of it many times, but it suddenly hit me recently that my daughter is coming up on dating age. You can bet your ass I'll be showing potential boyfriends my whistling clown. Like the old lady always said, her music boxes were excellent judges of character. Posted by you/RisingMac. I'm a nurse on the 8th floor of my hospital, and last night my patient jumped out his window. His body was not found. I'm a nurse working night shift, and last night was absolutely unreal. My patient jumped out his 8th floor window seemingly to his death, but as the title states, we did not find his body. I'm pretty sure I know why. It all started at the end of last week. I went to work as usual, and he was my last patient I needed to get report on. The patient's story seemed pretty cut and dry. He was a young guy in his late 20s, and usually young patients like this tend to be pretty easy. He was actually for a couple days. What's he here for? I asked the nurse leaving. It's kind of bizarre, she started. So he was at a rave of some kind, you know how those are. Anyway, according to the patient, he met a girl that was pretty goth, but in his words, super hot. She drugged him and he woke up the next morning. Date raped? I asked. I started to bring up his lab results for his stay. Yeah, blood tox came back positive. He doesn't think he was raped though. He woke up and his clothes were all still on, and according to him didn't appear to have been removed. He also said he didn't feel like he had had sex when he woke up. They take his wallet? No. That's what's so bizarre. All his cash was still there and his cards. She bit him though. He has multiple bites along his left arm. Bites? I asked. Yeah, definitely human bites. They broke the skin, that's why he went to ER. They were looking pretty red and he said he didn't feel right, so they gave him some 4 antibiotics to start and were going to release him on orals, but he actually started feeling and looking worse after the meds, so they admitted him, she said. So what's he got going on now? I asked. He's doing pretty well in there. He's up independent. Most patients aren't allowed to get up without staff in case they might fall, and they keep checking his levels daily. His labs look great, I said. Why is he still here? His vitals have been wonky, she started. He has to have an infection somewhere, they're thinking, because every day it seems like he's a little more Brady, low heart rate, and his temperature has slowly been dropping as well. His blood pressure has slowly been going down too. Like you said, his labs are fine, so whatever it is, nobody seems to know. These antibiotics don't seem to be doing anything. This is not uncommon at all. Whenever these doctors don't know what's going on, throw antibiotics at it. Something viral maybe? I asked. Must be, just don't know what yet. Could even be cancer, so oncology was consulted just in case. He's also not eating and drinking well. His 4 is running normal saline at 100 milliliters per hour, otherwise he's not really been eating or drinking much of anything. All in all, this was weird, but it didn't faze me at all. Sometimes patients are like an episode of House. It takes a week in the hospital to finally figure out what the hell is going on. Anyway, I go on about my day and go to see this guy first. He has virtually no meds to give being so young, so I figured I could get him done quickly. I did my usual bullshit introduction and wrote my name on his board before checking him out. The bites were pretty major, but they looked a lot better than I was expecting. It was probably a good idea he got that initial run of antibiotics. People's mouths are nasty. I took his vitals and they were slightly concerning. His heart rate was down to 58. 60 to 100 is considered normal range, and when he had come in I saw that he was around the 85 range. 58 itself wouldn't necessarily be concerning since some people are in the 50s normally, but for him it seemed low. Yeah, they keep telling me my numbers are a little lower every day, he told me. I mean, I feel okay for the most part. I'm just not really that hungry lately. Food smells good, but I just don't want to eat it. Also, I feel kind of thirsty, but water and pop just don't do anything for it. I know, you don't need me coming in here as the 900th person to tell you you need to eat. I see your weight is slightly down too, I told him. This wasn't uncommon either. We see a lot of young people who were perfectly healthy one day, then don't feel right, go to the ER, then find out they're full of cancer. I then finished his vitals. His temperature was 36.0 Celsius, about 96.8 in Fahrenheit. 37.0 is equal to 98.6, where he was at when he came in. Most people are actually in the mid-36 range, few people are truly 98.6. The point is, 36.0 is the lowest point where we don't need to worry. Once patients start dipping down into the 35s, we start worrying. His blood pressure also was 94/52, he had been right around the normal 120/80 at admission. There was no doubt about it, something was wrong. But what could it be? Normally people's lab values at least paint a picture of what it could be, but this guy's were fine. After I was done with my assessment, I went to my next patient and about my night. That night was pretty uneventful. He didn't call out for anything, but he was up most of the night. I told him we'd ask for a sleep aid for the next night. I will say that his midnight vitals were once again slightly lower than before. His temperature had dropped to 35.9, so I called the doctor and he said continue to monitor. His BP was 92/51 and the doc said the same, continue to monitor. 90s/50s is low but not considered the danger zone. Once it dips into the 80s we have a problem, and I thought to myself I'll be coming in tomorrow and that's where he'll be. His heart rate was also down to 56. I had a bad feeling about it, but there wasn't much we could do right then. I reported off to the same nurse from the night before. It's always nice when they are back, so report goes quicker. I updated her on his declining vitals and said he'd like something for sleep when the doctor comes around, but other than that he was fine. He wouldn't be fine when I came back that night. I came back the next night and it had been a shit show with this patient that day. The nurse reported that he had called her in because he felt bad and she said he was white as a ghost. He said he had never felt as weak or fatigued as he did then and he was struggling to breath. Now, normally this might be a sign of anemia, or low hemoglobin. She told me from the look of him and the symptoms he was describing it sounded like he needed a stat blood transfusion. Only problem was his hemoglobin level was perfect. They called a rapid response and literally everyone else thought the same. The doctor was hesitant to order a transfusion with a normal hemoglobin, but in the end he ordered 1 unit of packed red cells, with explicit instructions to stay with the patient the entire transfusion. Usually we only stay with them the first 15 minutes, then check back at timed intervals. The problem with giving the blood with a normal hemoglobin is that his blood might become too thick, which could cause clots. I asked what his level went up to and she told me I wouldn't believe it. So he was 13.6 at the start. After it was done he only went up to 13.7. Huh? I asked. I mean, it wasn't unheard of for a transfusion to only raise their hemoglobin a small amount, but usually it was more than by 0.1. I guess that's good, right? She asked me. And it really helped. His color and strength came back and his post-transfusion vitals improved a little bit. So it sounds like it's probably cancer then, I added. If his hemoglobin had been low, like in the 6 to 7, it'd be a slam dunk he had cancer somewhere. His hemoglobin being normal was a real monkey wrench though in his case. Probably. Oncology has a bunch of CTs ordered for tomorrow morning. We wrapped up report with him still not eating. As far as she knew he hadn't eaten a bite of anything in 2 days. Also, he likes the lights off in his room. He says the dark is therapeutic and it helps him relax and slow his mind. Don't open his shades in the morning either. He's not the first patient to ever tell us that. A lot of people like their rooms dark, so I didn't think anything of it. I saw him first again that night and we talked about it. Yeah man, I just felt so much better after that transfusion, he said. Yeah? I said. That's good. It's also nice it didn't raise your hemoglobin too much, so we don't have to worry about that. Maybe I can get another transfusion soon, he added. This was a first for me, someone actually wants a blood transfusion. I had to tell him they probably won't do another one if his levels stay where they are. I took his vitals and they were good, only slightly lower than what the day nurse had put in. I also checked his bites. They looked the same and were definitely deep. Someone got him good with their canines, your larger, sharper teeth. So this chick drugged you then bit you a couple times? I asked him. She got you good. Dude, she was so hot. I know it's messed up, I'm not even into goths, but she seemed pretty nice. She actually texted me last night. She text you? I asked surprised. I'd be calling the cops on her ass. You should have told me, we'd call the cops for you. Nah, he said. I mean, she bit me a couple of times and that's fucked up, but she didn't molest me or fondle me or anything. I'd be willing to meet her again to ask her why the fuck she did what she did. I thought to myself I wouldn't go anywhere near that bitch, but that's me. He then read me the text. Sorry for the other night. Call me when you're ready, you'll know what I mean. What do you think she means? I asked. I don't know, man, he started. But I'm gonna call her when I'm out of here. I thought to myself, of course you are. Anyway, the rest of that night was again pretty uneventful. He was up all night again, said he wasn't even tired. Like, at all. He had literally zero desire to sleep. His morning vitals were down again, hovering just above the danger zone. I reported off that morning and went home. I was going to be off for 2 days and I wondered if he would still be there. It was a nice 2 days off. I went back to work and he was still there, but he was worse than ever. Oncology has nothing. The CT results they ordered showed literally nothing. No cancers. What the fuck is going on with this guy? I asked rhetorically. His vitals are absolute piss. His pulse is down to 38, his temp is a wonderful 95.4 and his BP is 83/39. He's almost fucking hypothermic, I add. Nothing is doing shit, she said. It's like he's septic but he literally has no infection, anywhere. How are his labs? I asked. He's refusing lab draws. Says he doesn't want to lose any blood since the transfusion made him feel better. He says he feels worse every time they draw him. I was definitely worried. If his vitals went any lower he was going to be ICU bound. He probably needed to be there now. I couldn't shake the feeling he was going to crash that night and it was going to be a shit show. He's super moody too, she added in her last part. The aide that floated, from another floor, this wasn't her home floor, didn't know him so she tried to open his shades in the morning and he literally ripped her head off. Almost had to call security because we thought he'd hit her. I got ready for the day and went in to see him. His vitals were about as ass as she said they were. Pulse 35, temp 95.1, BP 80/35. He's literally fucking dying before our eyes. The bites on his arm also looked much better. Probably better than they should after only 2 days considering how deep they were. He was pretty short-tempered. Didn't want to bullshit or anything. I was in and out in just a few minutes. He looked like hell for sure. I didn't blame him for being cross. Not knowing what is happening to you and nobody having any answers is probably about the worst thing I can think of. A couple hours later the night hospitalist, the hospital doctor, came up to the floor to see how he was doing. I was sitting at the nurse's station charting at the time. We bullshit for a few minutes and he took a seat and started looking over his chart. He got to talking about him with a couple other nurses and the charge nurse about what the hell was going on. I had my own little theory. So a little about me. I'm a goofball. I was the class clown. I think in a way that whatever the situation, what can I say that will make people laugh? As the doctor and charge nurse were talking, the doctor sighed. I don't know, he said. Who knows what the hell it is? Call the CDC. There was about a 5-second silence and I chimed in. He's becoming a vampire. They both turned to me and looked at me for a second before bursting into laughter. Is that your nursing diagnosis? The charge nurse asked. Doesn't eat or drink, doesn't sleep, hates light now. With how much that transfusion helped it makes sense. After saying this I realized Jesus, it really does sound like he's turning. The shit hit the fan about midnight. I was getting vitals on another patient when I heard raised voices and screaming out in the hallway. I went out and it was coming from his room. The charge nurse walked out of his room visibly distressed. Call security please, she hollered to the desk. What's going on? I asked. He's out of control in there, almost hit another nurse. Hit the button, I want them up here, it's an emergency button, it's a silent alarm to notify security to get their ass up there. Let me talk to him, I told her. Don't hit the button just yet. Okay, so I was security at this hospital for almost 10 years prior to becoming a nurse. I went to nursing school at the urging of many of the people I had met working there and the health system actually paid for it since I was an employee. Point is, I thought I had good rapport with him and I knew what to do in these kinds of situations. I went into the room and he was definitely hysterical. He felt like shit and he was tired of it and nobody knew what the fuck was going on and everybody was jerking him around and he wanted another transfusion right the fuck now. He wasn't wrong on being jerked around. Nobody at the hospital knowing what to do with him was bullshit and it made us all look like we didn't know what we were doing. I explained his hemoglobin was now 14, which is damn near perfect. The doctor wasn't going to order another transfusion with a value like that. Fuck the value. IT worked last time. He looked ready to fight and as security I never backed down. I still didn't want to fight this guy even with my training. His gown was off and all he was wearing was boxers. I don't know if it was because he'd had a gown on the whole time or I just didn't notice before, but he was looking pretty cut. If he decided to fight it was not going to end well for anybody. I will call the doctor, I told him calmly. I can't promise anything. Hurry. I called the doctor and told him what was going on. He gave me shit about the vampire thing and I told him he's pissed. Security is up here and he is going to fight if he doesn't get what he wants. The doctor asked about his symptoms and I told him he does look pale but he's definitely not weak or fatigued. He fucked around trying to say he couldn't order it with his hemoglobin as is, and I told him he's just going to keep asking for it. He's obsessed with the fact it will make him feel better. The doctor finally agreed to order it but was adamant about monitoring. Telemetry, portable heart monitor, vitals every 5 minutes, nurse in the room at all times. It took about 15 minutes to get the blood prepared, and the patient was like a rabid animal. It was like the blood was crack or some other drug and he needed it. I went down and got it from the blood bank and came back up. Security was outside the room and the charge nurse was in the room trying to calm him down. He didn't see the blood bag in my hands. I started to hang the bag up on his 4-pole and that was it. He was on top of me in a second. He had been at least 5 feet away from me and I literally didn't even see him move. He knocked me away with such force it felt like I'd been hit by a dump truck. I flew off my feet and onto my back. He yanked the bag off the pole and held it in both hands before taking a huge bite and sinking his teeth into it. He then inhaled deeper than I'd ever seen anybody inhale. Oh my god, what the fuck is he? The charge nurse started before cutting herself off. The 2 security guards rushed towards him. No, I yelled. Don't touch him. I was back on my feet. He took another deep inhalation and stood up completely straight when he was done. He held the completely empty bag in his right hand and just stood there with his eyes closed and this strange smirk on his face, like he had just been empowered. It made me think of Thanos in Infinity War, when he puts the final stone in the gauntlet and gets this intense surge of power through his whole body. His upper lip and chin were soaked in blood and it had run down to his chest as well. He opened his eyes and looked at me for a second, gave an eerie smile, then ran towards the window and dove out, destroying the glass completely. Holy shit. A security guard bellowed. Oh my fucking god. The charge nurse screamed. Now the window was closed, of course, it doesn't even open, and yes, the glass is reinforced. He should not have been able to plow through it like that as if it were paper. One security guard was screaming into his radio and trying to look out the window while the other one and I ran for the stairs. Fuck the elevator, I yelled. We both practically jumped down the stairs. It only took about 30 seconds to get down 8 flights. We went out the side entrance where his window was. It's the side of the building with grass and some trees here and there. There's a big field directly east of it, so it's not traveled very much except for employees out smoking. There was a security vehicle speeding across the grass to our location with their lights on. We looked all over the area below his window and couldn't find his body. Where the fuck is it? I'm guessing that was the security supervisor since he had a white shirt on. A bunch of other nurses came rushing out with AEDs and stretchers. They must have called a code blue. Under normal circumstances this would very much have been a code blue. Where is he? People frantically asked. What the fuck is going on? More people with flashlights and small spotlights showed up and the area got much brighter. Because of this I was able to notice a large indentation in the grass, about 20 feet from the building under where his window was. Like something heavy had fallen from high up and landed with a thud in the soft grass. Where is he? Someone asked when they saw me checking out the indentation. What, he just got up and walked away? Someone else asked. After falling 8 fucking stories? I don't fucking think so, someone added angrily. Call the fucking police, I guess. I mean, Jesus Christ, the security supervisor said. Security searched a large portion of the area, including the field nearby along with the police, and no signs of the patient were found. No footprints, no blood from injuries sustained from the fall, nothing. Even if he did manage to survive the fall somehow, since the ground was still soft and not frozen, there's no way he'd have been able to walk away from it. That is, unless he was a vampire.